Hey, I'm Stacey, also known as the world's okayest librarian, where I have a mug to prove it. This video is about abortion in the early 1900s Australia, so straighten your glasses and shh. At the turn into the 20th century, abortion became visible in the public record, but usually when there was a problem. Terminating a pregnancy was generally a private act, and if done effectively, left no record for historians to trace. It is because of problems occurring during the abortions is when you will find archival evidence in hospital, police, legal, or coroner's reports and records. During this time, patent medicines or abortifacient pills were popular among women for regulating their menstrual cycles. These pills were said to restore the menstrual flow, clear blockages, and remove obstructions. Many women used them to bring on their period when it was a day or two late, and larger doses were used in attempts to bring on an abortion. These pills were advertised widely in newspapers until 1908, when Commonwealth legislation was introduced that prevented mail orders of these pills. The pills contained a variety of ingredients, including ergot, arsenic, iron, and aloes. These ingredients had a varying degree of effectiveness and impacts on women's health. Some of the pills worked by poisoning the system and inducing abdominal cramps. Others had side effects such as headaches, nausea, paralysis, blindness, and even death. And others were simply expensive fakes. Despite the risks, women continued to use these medicines because they were considered safe and legal. The New South Wales Royal Commission into the declining birth rate estimated that over 1 million pills were imported in 1902 alone, in addition to those manufactured locally. But if and when these medications failed, women turned to surgical abortion from midwives, nurses, doctors, local women, and sometimes friends and neighbours. Operations for abortion were performed in a number of ways. At the abortionist, a miscarriage was generally brought on by a puncture wound to the uterus, often using a sound or catheter. If a doctor was involved, a curette might also be used, either as the main surgery or afterwards to clean out the womb and help prevent infection. Women might also choose to abort themselves, achieved using a list of instruments, such as darning and knitting needles, crochet hooks, catheters, knives, pens and pen holders, and stilettos. The Higginson syringe, designed to aid vaginal cleanliness, could also be used to flush out the uterus, often with the aid of the strong disinfectant Lysol. Despite the risks, abortion was used by all social classes and by both single and married women. I want to share with you a couple of stories that I found on illegal abortion in the early 1900s. Around 12:30 the day of April 26, 1909, Mrs. Lucy Smith, a 38-year-old married woman and mother in happy and healthy condition, leaves her husband at home at 350 Alfred Street, North Sydney, saying that she was going to the bootmakers and then to the bank. Her husband is Andrew William Smith, a linotype operator who worked at the Sydney Morning Herald. Early afternoon there was a knock on the door of 486 Old South Head Road, Woolhara. This was the residence of Donald Roderick Sinclair, aged 35, described as an agent, and his wife, Rebecca Irwin Sinclair, 23 years old, mother of one. She is a dressmaker. Rebecca Sinclair answers the knock. Lucy is at the door, and when seeing Rebecca states, "You're not Nurse Sinclair." Rebecca replied, "You mean my mother-in-law, a big stout woman?" Lucy Smith said, "Yes, she treated me 4 or 5 years ago." Apparently during this conversation, Lucy mentioned that she was in a certain condition and had been taking things. An instant later she exclaimed, "Oh, I'm hot," and collapsed. Donald Sinclair said he was in the kitchen at 3:15 when he heard someone calling, "Don, Don." He went upstairs, found Mrs. Sinclair supporting a woman who told him that the woman had fainted They laid her on a couch and loosened her clothing, gave her smelling salts, and tried to revive her. Donald went himself without hat or coat to fetch the doctor, which obviously was an etiquette faux pas. Dr. Gordon Marr met with Rebecca Sinclair in the hall. She said, "A woman came about 5 minutes before I sent for you and asked me for the address of my mother-in-law, saying that she was in a certain condition and had been taking drugs. She complained of feeling hot and of pains, and then fell forward. I tried to bring her round with smelling salts." Dr. Gordon Marr was then shown the body of a woman lying on her back on a couch. An examination proved that life was extinct. The examination consisted of Dr. Marr looking into Lucy's eyes and putting a mirror to her mouth and said, "I am afraid she is gone." The body was quite warm and fully clothed, but the clothing was disarranged and slightly blood-stained. In Marr's opinion, death was due to the entrance of air into the veins, which had reached the heart, and the air must have been introduced by an instrument such as a syringe. Later that day, Andrew Smith, Lucy's husband, saw something in connection with his work at the Sydney Morning Herald office, which led him to make inquiries at the police station. He next saw his wife's body at the morgue. He could think of no reason why she should have gone to the Sinclairs. That night, Dr. Palmer said he made a post-mortem examination, and his opinion, death was due to the entrance of air to veins, which was Dr. Marr's opinion too. Lena Carter, a single woman, also happened to be at the house on that day. Her involvement with this story was on April the 20th, 6 days before Lucy Smith's death. She visited Rebecca Sinclair to have a conversation with her. Rebecca said that her procedure fee would be 5 guineas, which Lena couldn't afford. The amount was subsequently reduced to £3, 10 shillings. Lena returned the following day on the 21st of April for her procedure. She then stayed there until the 26th or 27th of April, where she left to receive treatment at the Coast Hospital Little Bay by Dr. Davis, and was discharged on the 13th of May, which coincidentally was the same day that Rebecca Sinclair was charged with having unlawfully used an instrument on Lena. On Monday 21st of June 1909, the trial of Lucy Smith's death continued at the Central Criminal Court, there being a previous trial on Thursday 6th of May against the Sinclairs. As there was no actual evidence to show, His Honour, Acting Justice Rogers, thought it would be far safer if the jury dismissed the question of murder from their minds and devoted themselves simply to the consideration of the question of manslaughter. The jury found both Donald and Rebecca guilty of manslaughter with a recommendation to mercy on account of their youth. The outcome was Donald Roderick Sinclair being sentenced to 5 years penal servitude and Rebecca Irwin Sinclair ordered to be imprisoned in the Goulburn jail and kept at hard labour for 3 years. Our next story took place in June 1910. A young girl, Victoria Florence Williams, 16 and a half years old, presented to the homeopathic hospital on Friday, June 10th, 1910, where Dr. Ray Hart treated her for internal pains. She returned on Monday, June 13th, and was admitted as an inpatient. Dr. Hart saw to her again. He administered ether to her and examined her. The examination showed that a perforation had taken place. This was suspicious to Dr. Hart, who promptly communicated with the Criminal Investigation Department. He convened a meeting of hospital staff, and Victoria Florence was then put under ether again and examined, but not operated on. On Tuesday, June 14th, Victoria's condition became worse, and detectives Coonan and Sainsbury arrived to take a dying statement. This was taken in the presence of Dr. Hart and Nurse Gray. In her statement, Victoria described, with considerable detail, an operation which, she said, her mother had performed upon her with the object of relieving a certain condition. She added that her mother had made her promise to keep the operation a secret. Victoria Florence died the morning of Thursday, the 16th of June, 1910. Her mother is Victoria Mary Williams, 34 years old. Her and her daughter were residents of Market Street, South Melbourne. Her husband lived in Western Australia, and they had been separated for 9 years. Victoria Mary discovered that her daughter had been misconducting herself with a young man in Prahran and believed her daughter had been seduced by a former employer. She confronted Victoria Florence and asked if she was in a certain condition. Victoria Florence said yes and implicated a Prahran citizen, which Victoria Mary then confronted. He denied it though and told her that a young man living near his house had been keeping company with her daughter, which Victoria Florence also admitted that it was so. Victoria Florence worked with Lily Elizabeth Harty, a packer and weigher of parcels employed at Parsons Brothers Oatmeal Millers. Lily said she had only known Victoria Florence since May 19, 1910, and that they became friendly but did not exchange confidences. Lily first became aware that Victoria Florence was ill when her younger sister called for her wages. After Victoria Florence's hospital visit on 10th of June, Lily called to see her and asked her what the cause of her illness was. Victoria told her mother was the cause of it. The coroner found that Victoria Florence died from septic peritonitis due to a criminal operation performed by Victoria Mary Williams. Detectives Coonan, Sainsbury, Lonsdale and Ashton arrested her. On Friday 17th of June 1910, at the Melbourne City Court, she was charged with feloniously killing and murdering her daughter, Victoria Florence Williams. During the first trial in late June, much like the Lucy Smith case, there was a lot of speculation with no hard evidence, and that no instruments were found in Mrs. Williams's house. Dr. Brett, who performed the autopsy, said that cause of death was due to blood poisoning following an illegal operation. Though not impossible, but very highly improbable, that Victoria Florence operated on herself. Dr. Brett, in his career, has only come across one instance of the kind. In the second trial on July 18, 1910, the deceased's statement was read, and as it were a dying declaration, it gave the same force as though it had been made under oath. His Honour, however, said, "I am not satisfied that the girl, when making that statement, had a settled conviction that she will die, and he was of the belief that the doctors persuaded Victoria Florence that she was likely to die, and possibly yielded to that belief that her mother committed the act." The jury, after about 10 minutes consideration, returned a verdict of not guilty, and Victoria Mary was discharged. Well, that wraps up this video on abortion in 1900s Australia. It is sad to think that so many women put their lives in danger by undertaking this risky procedure. That in their minds they would prefer to die than having to deal with judgment from others by being a single unwed mother, or the burden of having to take care of an extra child. It makes me thankful that we live in a time and country that legally allows these procedures to happen safely without the stigma that was faced by women back in those days. Thanks for watching and see you next time.